It aired only once. No reruns. No rebroadcasts. No official explanation. For decades, the network that carried it acted as though it had never existed. Buried somewhere in the extensive history of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, one of the most iconic and influential programs in American television, lies a missing episode. It was a broadcast that briefly graced the airwaves before disappearing so completely that even the archives, which meticulously preserved countless episodes, seemed to deny it ever occurred. At the center of this enigma is Johnny Carson himself, the man who shaped late-night television for an entire generation, and whose presence defined the very concept of the American talk show. For 3 decades, Carson ruled the late-night landscape with a calm authority that few could rival. His measured delivery, quick-witted humor, and unshakable ability to control any conversation earned him the title of television royalty. Millions of Americans ended their evenings in his company, tuning in after midnight to watch him work his effortless charm. Guests clamored for the chance to sit on his couch, understanding that even a single appearance could alter the trajectory of their careers. Yet even for someone as legendary as Carson, there were nights that lingered in memory as disasters best forgotten. Whispers circulating in television circles for decades hint that one night went so terribly wrong that NBC moved decisively to ensure that the public would never witness it again. This episode, though not lost in the usual sense, remains missing. And the few people who claim to have seen it all recount the same thing. Something transpired on that stage that the network was desperate to bury. The evening itself started like any other. Inside NBC's Burbank studio, a crowd of eager viewers filled the seats, buzzing with excitement. Stage lights glowed softly, casting the familiar aura of anticipation across the set. Crew members moved quietly between cameras, double-checking angles, adjusting lighting, and preparing for the seamless orchestration that The Tonight Show had perfected over decades. The band, warm and ready, tested their instruments, preparing to launch the iconic theme that had become synonymous with the show. To audiences watching from home, it appeared to be another standard night with Johnny Carson. The curtain lifted, the band struck the familiar chords of the opening theme, and Carson stepped onto the stage with his usual effortless poise. He had honed this precise moment for years, a subtle smile, a graceful tilt toward the audience. The applause came instantly, exactly as expected. Yet, to those present in the studio, something felt off. A few attendees later recounted a subtle tension that had permeated the room. Carson's opening monologue, usually unerringly smooth, was unusually brief. His jokes landed, but they carried a faint hesitation, almost imperceptible to viewers at home. Behind the scenes, however, the atmosphere was already fraught. Hours before the cameras rolled, a problem had arrived at the studio. It had a name, the guest who was not supposed to appear. The remainder of the guest list was typical: a television actor, a musician, and a comedian who had made multiple previous appearances on the show. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for the first guest. A once famous actor whose career had peaked in the late 1970s arrived over an hour late. According to accounts from former crew members, he did not arrive sober. Staff members described him stumbling through hallways, loudly joking with anyone he encountered. His speech was slurred, and his behavior erratic. Seasoned television professionals had seen intoxicated guests before, but this case was different. Johnny Carson, known for his insistence on professionalism, took meticulous control of his show, and few tolerated disruption with less patience than he did. When news of the guest's condition reached Carson, his reaction was reportedly explosive. Behind the closed doors of his dressing room, an argument erupted. Several staff members working nearby later said they could hear the raised voices echoing through the hallways. Normally calm and collected, Carson was said to have threatened to cancel the interview outright. The guest insisted he was capable of proceeding, while producers scrambled to salvage the situation. The audience was already being seated. There was no substitute guest ready to step in. Canceling the segment mere minutes before broadcast would have caused chaos, leaving the producers with little choice but to continue. Carson left the dressing room with a stern warning. If the guest embarrassed himself on stage, the responsibility would fall on the producers. At the time, no one could have anticipated just how prophetic that warning would prove to be. As the show progressed, Carson concluded his monologue and moved quickly to introduce the first guest. The audience applauded politely as the actor stepped onto the stage. At first glance, he seemed composed enough. His smile was stiff, his eyes slightly glassy, yet nothing appeared immediately alarming. He settled next to Carson, and the interview began, or at least it attempted to. Almost immediately, something was clearly amiss. Before Carson could ask his initial question, the guest launched into a meandering story about Hollywood parties. He jumped erratically between topics, repeatedly interrupting Carson, speaking faster than the host could redirect him. Initially, the audience laughed, assuming it was all part of the performance. But within minutes, the laughter began to fade as the guest's ramblings grew stranger and more personal. The actor began naming figures from the entertainment world, producers, executives, and fellow actors, while Carson made several attempts to steer the conversation toward safer territory. Each time, the guest resisted, continuing with increasingly uncomfortable anecdotes. Then came a moment that some viewers would later remember vividly. Leaning forward in his chair, the actor began describing a situation involving a powerful Hollywood executive and a prominent actress. Carson attempted to interrupt, but the guest persisted. Crew members later recalled a production assistant moving toward the stage, seemingly ready to cut the segment entirely. Then something occurred that most viewers could not hear. The guest leaned toward Carson and whispered something off microphone. Carson heard it clearly, but the majority of the audience did not. His reaction was immediate and telling. His posture stiffened, his expression hardened, and for a brief moment, the man who had spent decades mastering the art of live television appeared completely unprepared. He glanced at the cameras, then toward the offstage producers, and remained silent for several tense seconds. The audience did not know whether to laugh or remain quiet. Carson pressed his lips together, leaned back, and said nothing. Those who witnessed the broadcast live would later describe it as one of the strangest moments in late-night history. Johnny Carson, a man who could always deliver a witty retort, seemed to have none. Then, without warning, the broadcast cut to commercial. Mid-sentence, with no explanation or transition, the feed vanished. In some regions, the show returned after the break with an entirely different guest seated, while in others, the program ended abruptly. Viewers were confused, and phone lines at NBC affiliates lit up with questions. By morning, the episode appeared to have disappeared completely. Behind the scenes, NBC's response was swift and unusually aggressive. Former employees, speaking anonymously, recounted that internal memos ordered staff not to discuss the broadcast. Affiliate stations were instructed to claim the interruption had been a technical error. Most remarkably, the master recording of the episode, which would normally have been preserved with thousands of other Tonight Show episodes, was reportedly flagged for destruction. Technicians were given explicit orders to eliminate it. Such instructions were extremely rare. NBC had meticulously archived decades of programming, yet this episode was treated differently. Rumors later suggested that one technician hesitated, fully aware of the historical value, and some speculate that an unofficial copy may have survived privately. NBC has never confirmed any of this. Weeks passed, and the missing episode remained unmentioned publicly. During a routine monologue, Carson made a fleeting remark that caught the attention of those who remembered the peculiar broadcast. While joking about changing television standards, he paused and said, "Some things are better left forgotten." The audience laughed politely, but his smile seemed tight. For most viewers, the moment passed unnoticed, but for those aware of the vanished episode, it felt like a quiet acknowledgement. Carson had not forgotten either. The guest at the center of the incident never publicly addressed the event. However, his career began to crumble shortly afterward. Film roles grew scarce, a television project he had been developing vanished without explanation, and public appearances became rare. Over time, he almost entirely disappeared from the spotlight. Rumors circulated in Hollywood that his Tonight Show appearance had exposed sensitive information that some powerful figures wanted kept secret. Whether these rumors were true or merely speculation remains unclear, but the actor once hinted at the incident during a rare interview. "I don't talk about that," he said. "That night ruined me," and he refused to elaborate further. For decades, the story of the missing Carson episode persisted mainly as a piece of television folklore. That changed in the early 2000s when fragments began surfacing online. A user on a vintage television forum uploaded a grainy clip less than 30 seconds long, showing Carson unusually still at his desk while an off-camera voice, presumably the guest, spoke loudly and erratically. The audio quality was poor, but one line could be faintly made out. "They all knew and said nothing." Within a day, the clip disappeared. The account that posted it was deleted, and attempts to trace the source failed. Over the years, additional fragments appeared. Still images, screenshots from collectors claiming to possess damaged reels. But each time, legal takedown notices ensured the material vanished again. More than 40 years later, the lost episode endures as one of television's most enigmatic mysteries. Nearly every Tonight Show episode starring Johnny Carson has been preserved, restored, and archived. Yet this single broadcast remains absent. No official footage, no transcript, no confirmed recording. Only rumors, whispers from crew members, and the recollections of a handful of viewers who witnessed something that the network never wanted repeated. What was said on that stage? What did the guest reveal that rendered the host of America's most famous talk show speechless? And why does the network still seem determined to keep it hidden? Somewhere, perhaps in a private collection or forgotten storage vault, the full recording may still exist. Should it ever resurface, it could finally answer the question that has haunted late-night television for generations. Until that day, the missing Carson episode remains exactly what it has always been, a mystery.